Hello, welcome back to the videos on computer science. In this video, we are going to create an array of objects. But before we get to that, remember from last video what we did, and I will leave the description here and the code below. We have three different arrays, in this case a two-dimensional arrays and two one-dimensional array, and we create a mapping. We create a mapping of this array, and this is what we call parallel arrays. If you remember, the point of this was to produce something that have the representation of this game by players, round, and the total. So when we run this code, what we did was creating an output that map the different three arrays, right? Now what we are going to do is to move from that idea and use the knowledge that we have on objects to create an array of objects. So these, instead of mapping from one another, we are going to create something that looks like this. Let's say that we have an array. So let's say that we have a new array, but this new array is not of the type of any of these arrays individually, but of the type of object called players. We are going to have a class called player, and in that class we're going to have three variables. One variable that is the string, which is the name. One variable that is an integer, which is the total. And one variable that is an array of integer, which is the rounds. Now, these will have modulus later when we talk about how to improve security by making the variables private and using modulus to add those to access to those variables. But for now, we leave it like this. So what we want to do is to create a class for developing the objects, which will have each of them. For example, object 1 will be Annie, and it will have these rounds, and it will have this total, and object 2 Boris, and so on. And we are going to save all of that into an array. So the array will be of the type player, and in each position will have, for example, one player there, another one here, and so on, right? So this is an array of the type of this type. So what we want to do is to have something like this. For example, if I run my game, now I have populate 2 players only, right? So my object 1 is Annie with a total of this and this. This looks the same output than when we were mapping the arrays, when we were doing parallel arrays. However, on the background, this is using objects, making the code more robust to have each player with the corresponding data. There are multiple ways to do this, and we're gonna do it together. First, we need to have the class player, and let's build that. For example, you create a class player. This is simple, so I don't need to redo this with you. Remember that from here, player will have 3 variables, one array included, and this is how it looks. We know for sure that there will not be more than 4 rounds, so we have an array integers equal to 4. This is my class player that will allow me to create different players, different objects of players, right? So let's say that now we are going to create the class game, which will have all of the different the process of populating the array of objects and the process of creating these objects using this class called players. So we have game, I have game 1, 2, 3, and we're gonna have a void function there. So this is what we have at this point. We don't have much. So what we want to do is first create our players, and here we have a big distinction. We can do this in two ways. Well, there are more, but mainly two ways. One is that we are going to create a player and put each value of each variable manually or using the user input. And this is what I did here. So as you can see, for example, and we're gonna just redo this, I create a player, an array of players, right? And I create a player and I give the values one by one. This is not necessarily the best way to do this because it is not using the data that you already have in a smart way. You can read those values from the user, and we can divide the video in order to do that later. And also we can use the values that we have from the previous exercise, the previous work, which is this. We have already the names, we have already the totals, we have already the rounds, so we can copy that data, and I can pause here. You can pause the video and check on this. You can copy this data if you are not going to use the user input, and with this data then we are going to automatically populate the objects and then use those objects to fill in the array of objects, right? So let's say that you already have this is doing this exercise given the data. So let's create our other variables. For example, our array of objects. We have the array will be of the type player because we are using the class player, and it will be an array, and we will call that array players object, right? And we want to create a new player, and because it's an array, it needs to have a size, right? We know that they are, because it's given, the data is given, we have 6 of them. So that's it. Players object is created. Now we need to create one player. Sorry, this is the array, right? So we need to create now one player and then fill it with the corresponding data, and finally save that object into position 0, and then into position 1, and then into position 2, and so on and so on and so on. So now that we have our array, we can create our players. However, we're going to do this 6 times, right? So we can have a for loop. Cool? So we can have a for loop that goes from, and let's call it P of players, from 0 to the length of this array player objects, right? So we go that -1 players object that length, and we're going to update the players. Now what do we want to do here? Well, we first want to save the name, in this case Annie, to the, remember that here we have one object, and inside, look, this is on position 0. Let's say that this is players object, right? This is position 0, position 1, position 2, position 3, and so on. Now here in position 0 per se, we have a name. We have also a total, and we have also rounds, right? So if we say players on position 0, that name we can assign Annie to this position. So let's try to do this. This is more complicated thing that you will see here, so don't worry. What we want? Well, we want players on position 0, right? On position 0, players O on position 0, that name will be equal to, I have an array of a string, so names on position 0 as well. We can print this for you to see that. Now, remember, this will be doing it many times, right? 6 times in total, so we can change this to P, and we can change this to P. Now, position 1 will also be changed, position 2, position 3, with these names. Will be populated with these names. So we have each of the positions, position 0, 1, 2, 3 of the array of objects will be populated with the corresponding name. We can do the same for total. So, for example, if we say players on the position P that total, and you can see the variables we're coming here, is equal to, we have an array called totals on the same position, P. Perfect. Now, names and total will be populated. How do we see this? Well, remember, and we can have here, for example, populating or filling our array. Filling our array. And here we're gonna print. We can have another modulo for this, but no need. So what do we want? It's the same thing. We can just go and print each of these values that we already have, right? We have these values, so we can have system print that. So now look at what happened. Let's say that I want to run this, and we have a problem because player OP is null. Yes, this is because we never create our new object here, right? We just create an array of objects, but we never create a new object. So here what we want is, every time that we do this, we want to create an object and put it on the position P. So let's say now we want to create player, player of the type player. We're gonna call it temp, and is equal to new player, and we want, let me see, and here we want to put the players on the players object, right? The array on the position P. We want it to make equal to temp. So basically we are creating an MP, temporary player. We are putting that temporary player in each of the position, and then we are changing the value of each of these positions, names and total. Let's run this again. So look now how I have here each of the names and the total, names and total, because this is what we printed here. Cool. So we already did the names and the total of this. Now what we want to do is also save the rounds. But round, look, that is a matrix, and each row each row will represent the corresponding value for each of the players, right? But in each row we have 4 values, so it's an array there, right? So where we are updating the values here, for example, and let me put here, we want to insert the round, right? And round will be, because it's an array that we are trying to copy and save it, will be needed, a for will be needed, right? So we have a for loop now. Let's call it R for rounds, and we'll start at 0, and it will go for, it only will say 4, right? So we want to go from 0 to 3, but How do I change this to be dynamic? Well, I know that it will be for the length of each row. So I can say that I have here rounds, so I want to go to rounds, right? Any of the row, because each row have the same value, right? So I want to be specific and say to the length of this row. So this is what it does. I'm checking each row, can be row 0, can be row 1, doesn't matter, but each row, the length of the row is 4. In this case, if you change this, it will change automatically. This is how you find the length of a matrix, in this case of the column. If you want to find the length of rows, you just say round that length. But we cannot just say round that length as we did with this array before, because it will give us 6, and when we are trying to focus on the columns here. So now you say r++, and in this 4, what we want to do is to take those values in the column for the corresponding row P, because there are 6 players, each row corresponds to 1 player, and save it in now players O position P, because it's the player, right? That rounds on the position R, because my round in the player object is an array of 4, right? So I want to go from 0 to 4. So I will go here and I will save the position 0. What would you save there? Well, I will save the value of the variable of this matrix here in the row P in the column R. So it will save the first value. It will come and say here, okay, row P, row 0, okay, I'm here. Column R, okay, 0, I'm here. I will save this 70 to the player 0, which is the same one, Annie, in the round 0, and then 10 in the round 1, and then 23, and then 3. So with this, I will be mapping, or I will be saving the values of this round here, because it's first row, all columns, to all the different positions in this array. If we use the same thing to print, right? Let's say that we want to print here. We want to print this value. So we don't need this. We don't want ln, because what will happen is that we'll print the value one by one. We want to print one and then the other next to it with a space. So we want this, and then we want a space here. Okay, if we print, now look, Annie 110 and this. Oh, but actually I don't have the space, and Boris start on the same line, so I can add a space here, and after I finish printing this, I can just print an empty line. So here I print an empty line. So if I run this, now look, I have Annie, I have 106, and I have the values. Cool. This was using loops to populate with this data, populate the array of objects. We can use now a message that will say my first object, or player, Annie, total this, and round this. The next level will be to do it with user input. And after that, variables here, we make all of these variables private. We create modulus to access to this variable and to set those values, so that it's not easy accessible from another class like what we are having right now. But this is how you can create an array of objects. Bye-bye.